You're listening to the Educating Aiden podcast. Learning things he should probably have already known, one conversation at a time. Here's your host, Aiden.
Hi folks, thanks so much for joining us. Today we have a very special guest. We have Rev Andrew Rawding, the rector of the parochial group of Brackenville, Donna Henry and Balaclog. That's for the Church of Ireland, of course. And we have Andrew here today. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm well, thank you, Aiden. Yeah, thank you. It's good to see you.
How's your day been?
Busy day. I managed to cut the grass this morning, which was great, and then I cycled here from Cull Island, enjoyed the sunshine, the flies, all that sort of stuff. But it was great. So I did find your found your little den eventually.
We like to keep the location of the podcast very secret, of course.
It's a very secretive location. Yeah.
So that was over 400 miles you cycled today. That's fantastic.
Oh, at least 400. Yeah,
that's fantastic, Andrew.
Yeah. And I parachuted in before I started the cycle ride. Yeah.
Oh, you don't. Oh, that was you in the. Oh, that's fantastic.
That was, yeah.
Andrew, you're based in Cull Island, is that
That's right? Yeah.
But obviously, you don't have a Cull Island accent, do you?
No, I don't. I don't have a Cull Island accent. My accent.
And this isn't an accent you're putting on because you're a man of the cloth, no?
No. I mean, people say when they hear my accent, they say, "Oh, you're on holiday," or "Welcome to Ireland," or things like this. Yes. But I mean, I could have been born in Cull Island, couldn't I? And my parents could have moved when I was young to London.
Of course. Is that where you're from originally?
And that's where I got my accent from. But actually, I was born in London. I was born in North London, in Highbury and Islington. And then I grew up in a place called Palmer's Green, which is just slightly further north within the London Borough of Enfield. It's on the main line rail, but if you were getting there by tube, you'd either go to Arnos Grove or Southgate on the Piccadilly line. So there we are.
You know that for people here going, what's he talking about? What's a tube?
What is the tube?
Did he call me a tube?
The underground, yeah.
But yeah, I recently got an invite to go to London to do a podcast, and we were looking up the logistics of it, and the guy was like, "Oh, just jump in the tube here," and I'm like, "What?" from the airport. I was going, "No, that's not going to happen, my friend." So Andrew, how did you get into being a man of the cloth?
Well, I mean, it's quite a long story, but
we have time.
Okay. I grew up in a very Christian home. I think you might describe it as fundamentalist. Certainly, my parents had a literal interpretation of the Bible, and perhaps even still do to this day. I was baptised in the Church of England. Okay. My father was the organist and choir master in the Church of England, albeit he come from a Methodist background. My mother was originally Church of England. But then my parents were born again, I think in the late 60s, through Billy Graham. I don't know if you heard of Billy Graham, a big American evangelist.
I'm sorry, what is born again for people that don't know what that term is?
Well, that's a very good question. What is born again? Well, there's an encounter that Jesus has with a man called Nicodemus.
Okay.
And he says Nicodemus comes to him in the night. It's in John's Gospel, John chapter 3. And he comes in the night, and he has this conversation in the darkness with Jesus. And Jesus says to him, "You must be born again," to him as an individual. But what's happened is that what we might call the born again movement, I think probably predominantly coming from America, took this verse and then said, right, this is how you become a Christian.
Oh, okay.
This is what you need to do if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to believe in Jesus, you need to be born again. So there's a whole group of Christians out there, they would call themselves Christians, who would say, well, I'm a born again Christian. Mm-hmm. And what that means is the way that's defined by the people who are sort of saying this is the gospel is you need to accept that you're a sinner.
Okay.
And then you need to say sorry. You need to accept Jesus as your savior, and then you are sort of born again. Now, actually, that's just one interpretation of that. I think when we look at the original writing, it's almost certainly written by the early church in order to promote baptism, because Jesus says, unless a man is born by the Spirit and water. So actually, I think this is a message to the Jews of Jesus' time, or even after Jesus' time, because of course he was born maybe 100 or more years after Jesus' time. Well, it was a message to the Jews, this conversation with a prominent Jewish leader saying, well, actually, this new Christian religion is for you, And if you want to be part of that, you need to be baptized. And that was perhaps one of the distinctions between Judaism and Christianity. Anyway, so my parents, found a much more significant Christian faith for themselves. And it would have been described as born again. And I was brought up in that, and, you hear this here in Northern Ireland. Are you saved? Are you born again? I even get people asking me as director, well, are you saved? Are you born again? Yes. And then there needs to be a date, when you're saved and born again. So the great news is that when I'm asked this, I can say, yes, I am born again. And I do have a date. The 5th of November, 1973. At the age of 3, I sat on my mum's bed with my older brother and we invited Jesus into our hearts. So I was brought up in this very full-on Christian family. And I suppose, really, I didn't know anything else about I don't think I knew anything apart from Christianity. And then I would say that I escaped from that. At the time, I probably didn't realize I was escaping, but I was escaping. There was, there was a trauma involved in my upbringing. It was very controlling. I would say it was manipulative and that sort of thing. I think if I look back, I would even describe it as a sort of almost like a cult, almost like a sect. Very, 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 very sort of intense way of doing Christianity. And I escaped from that. My first job was actually working with children who had cerebral palsy. In the Chelsea Hospital for Children with Cerebral Palsy. I failed my A-levels and I was just looking for something to do. And I went to the local library and I flicked, I thought maybe I'd be a missionary one day, or maybe I'd be a leader of a church. Didn't quite know how it was going to work out. But, I had this sort of sense of calling, just doing something within Christianity. But I went to the library and I was a young man who was looking to go somewhere in life, but didn't know what to do. And I took this big book of occupations, it was called, A to Z. And I flicked through this big book of occupations at maybe at the age of, 17 or 18 or something like that. And I got past, archaeologist, archivist, and I got to army. And I looked down army. This is in Palmer's Green, in a library in Palmer's Green in North London. I looked down army, and it told you all about the British Army and what you needed to get into the British Army as a soldier. And then it had officer, and all you needed to do to get into the British Army is an officer. And I'd been a Boy Scout, and I had a very influential Scout leader who sort of had encouraged me in leadership. And this officer thing was all about leadership potential. You needed 5 O-levels, minimum of 5 O-levels. Well, I easily had that, equivalent to GCSEs. And then you applied, you wrote to this address. So I wrote to that address and started the journey to become a British Army officer. And at the age of 19... I went to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and in September 1989. Then in December 1990, at a commissioning parade at which Lady Diana or Princess Diana was the sort of the chief person there, the chief guest of honour. In 1990, I was commissioned as a British Army officer. And I joined a British Army regiment called the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers in December 1990. And in August, about summer 1991, I came to Northern Ireland as an officer in the British Army, as a platoon commander. And the first place I ever patrolled, we were put in helicopters. I'd never been there before in my life. We were put in helicopters. And I picked a location on a map in a place called Washing Bay. And the helicopter landed in a place called Washing Bay. And then with my men, we patrolled from Washing Bay to a police station in a place called Cull Island in August 1991. So that's my first connection with Cull Island. It's August 1991. Wow. I can talk all about 9-10 years in the British Army, my experiences in Northern Ireland, my near-death experiences, the death of my friends, all sorts of encounters. I was here for 2.5 years between 1991 and 1994. Did some of my time in Cull Island and East Tyrone, but mainly Newry, South Armagh, that sort of area. That was the main place I worked. I did that. Then I started to sort of, I think it was trauma I think it was the impact of Northern Ireland in particular on myself and on the soldiers, and seeing all that. I think it was my time in Bosnia in 1995 and 1997, and seeing all that. And I got to a place in 1998, 1999, where I felt deeply uncomfortable with what I was doing.
Okay.
As a British Army officer, and because there was a selfishness to it, and it was a very, very competitive environment as an officer, and I was doing very, very well. You know, I was in the best job I could be, but I could see that in order to survive in this environment, it had to be more about me. You know, will I be, you know, how's Andrew going to get on? Yeah. How's he going to be better than these people or that person? And how's he going to compete with his? And I think this is not me, you know. And I'd seen young soldiers who'd carried, say, for example, the dead body of their friend who was killed in a bomb in Uri. I'd seen all them leave the army. I'd seen how soldiers were just being used really to sort of almost tick boxes in order to make officers look good or officers to look busy or whatever it was. And I thought, I did have this deep Christian faith, and I think at the heart of that was compassion. You know, what I was sensed the heart of it was love and compassion. Plus, I did think, you know, I recognized I was traumatized and that. So I resigned my commission in 1999 in order to follow a call to holy orders within the Church of England. And what I was doing actually was following a call to become a chaplain.
And what's a chaplain?
A chaplain in the British Army. So what I was doing, I was in the British Army and thinking, do you know what? These soldiers are the salt of the earth. They come from economic and social deprivation. They're really only in the army for a job, most of them, for 3 meals a day and everything else. They're coming from all this sort of background. If they weren't doing this, many of them would be involved in crime or come from land, you know, and relationship breakdown. I want to continue to serve these men. Yes. Some of them have literally put their lives on the line alongside me. Some of them have lost their friends. Some have followed me into situations been highly dangerous and had an impact on them. I want to continue to serve them. So what the best thing to do is I could still get the army experience of travel, you know, comradeship, fitness and all that, leadership and all the rest of it. But rather than just being about myself, I can be a chaplain or a padre. And that would mean I would be effectively a priest or a minister, pastor, you might use that term, within the British Army in order to look after pastorally the men, the women and their families, provide spiritual care for them. Yeah. But in order to do that, you couldn't just say, you know, well, actually, now I'm an officer, now I just want to be a padre. Yeah. It's a process. You have to leave. You have to be validated by an established church. You have to go through their whole selection process, train theologically, do some time in their church before you come back. Yeah. So in 1999, I resigned my commission. I had nowhere to go. My wife was married at the time. We had one child. I had nowhere to go. I had no savings, nothing. I mean, my life had been fairly chaotic, really. I was just a young man living the dream or trying to live the dream. And so I suppose I took a step of faith and followed this call to holy orders within the Church of England. So in time, I was accepted for training. I went to theological college in Durham University and did a diploma in theology and ministry. I then was ordained as a deacon, first of all, in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Yes, which was the cathedral church of my diocese, which is the Diocese of London. And then I was ordained a priest in my parish church in North London, in Enfield. I did that curacy for 3 years, but all during that time I was thinking, well, actually, I'm going to go back into the army and be a chaplain. I mean, my wife didn't want to be a vicar. Vicar's wife, I didn't ever see myself as being a parish priest or a vicar. Yeah. It was all about, you know, I'm just doing this to get back in the army. So there came this moment, and I was keeping communication with the army hierarchy and all the rest of it. And then there came this moment where I went to the army chaplaincy for the sort of selection interview. Okay. And I was in front of 3 highly paid, the chaplain general, the assistant chaplain general, the most senior, the 3 most senior chaplains within the British Army, highly paid, you know. And I had this interview with them. And of course, I was going as a former British Army officer with operational experience and all the rest of it. And I sat down. And at that time, you had to take your wife with you.
Okay.
Because there'd been chaplains who had not declared that they had wives or something like this, and then they joined the British Army and their wives had kicked off and all hell had been broken loose. So there was this policy, you had to bring your wife. So I brought my wife, God bless her, and that was very traumatic for her because, well, I don't want to be interviewed. There's nothing to do with me type thing, Anyway, so we had this interview, and I'm just almost thinking, this is a done deal. All my peers, all my superiors are thinking, yeah, we'd love you as an army chaplain.
You should have been a shoo-in at that point.
Yeah, you've got all that experience. You've been there. You've almost died. You've seen people die. You know what it's like. You've been on the coal face. You know the system. Bring it on. And I went to that interview, and these three chaplains were like, adjusting their ties. I was getting very hot in the room as I was answering questions. Things like, well. I can't remember. I was answering these questions, and then they said, we need to stop the interview. We need to restart the interview, and we'll start again. And what you need to do is you need to forget about those 10 years in the army. Pretend it didn't happen. What? So they restarted the interview.
Yeah.
And it went like this. It was something like, I can't remember the order, this is a long time ago, but it was something like, now, you do realise if you come in the British Army that you might go to some dangerous places. How do you feel about that? And I'm thinking, I've been 2.5 years in Northern Ireland. I have literally walked away from direct bombs. I should be dead. I've been in Bosnia, artillery fire, NATO airstrikes,
Yeah.
So and then there was something like, you do realise if you come into the British Army, you might have to do some fitness. And, how do you feel about that? And I'm thinking, well, I've always been in the top 3 of the fastest people in my battalion ever since, I joined. So I think there was this problem that they had in front of them someone who, in one sense, had more experience than them. And they weren't going to be able to control me, and I wasn't going to be sort of deferential. Oh, well, dangerous places, I'll be asking for your prayers and just trusting in Jesus and reading my Bible, and I'm sure you'll look after me. And, they were going to nod. Oh, yes, young man, yes, okay. Oh, it's all right, we'll look after you. And, so I didn't get the job. And, they were threatened by me, threatened by my experience and all the rest of it. You
would have shook the thing up a bit for them.
Well, I would have done because I was in a very senior appointment as a junior, relatively, junior, but senior captain, I suppose, where I was the adjutant, something called an adjutant, and which meant that I was the one that was supposed to be looking, almost supervising the chaplain, the padre within the regiment. So I had first-hand experience of padres or chaplains, and I knew that all was not well.
Oh, okay.
So I had an inside view, Anyway, so what happened after that was that my wife and I were like, well, what do we do now? I've never had this call to be a vicar. I don't want to be a vicar. I don't want to be a parish priest. My call was always to chaplaincy. My wife was like, well, I never wanted to be a vicar's wife, but I could go back into the army because the pay's better. We can travel the world. We can live in Germany. She was fluent in German or whatever it may be. We might go to Cyprus, all these sort of stuff. So we'll still have a good standard of living. What do we do now? So my wife actually was originally from Northern Ireland.
Okay.
And I thought, you know what? I mean, there's a couple of things that have been going on while I was a curate in North London. I had been at theological college, and I was surrounded by all these people who are very clear, or seemed to be very clear on why they were coming into the Church of England. Mm-hmm. Some of them were women who were quite rightly part of this movement of sort of women being accepted by the Church of England as priests, and really were coming from a place of pain and sort of fighting for their rights almost. So we're very, very clear. God has called me to the priesthood, and, this is, I'm on this journey. Others might have just grown up within the church and really not even had any other job, but been, felt a calling and went to university and now were becoming Others maybe were the sons or daughters of vicars or bishops or anything else. And I come from the British Army, and I deliberately went to a theological college in the north of England. I wanted to get away from London. I wanted to get away from Oxbridge. I wanted to get away from sort of anything middle class. I wanted to be and experience what my soldiers had experience.
Yes.
So a lot of them came from Newcastle, from Northumberland, from former mining towns. That's just sort of a regimental recruiting area. So I wanted to go and expose myself to a different way of life in the northeast of England and, rub shoulders with that sort of thing. Okay, it was Durham University, but that happened to be where the Theological Training College was. And so while I was at theological college, I was really wrestling with why are you here? What is distinctive about you, Andrew, that sets you apart from all these people?
Yes.
And what was distinctive, I suppose, was I'd been in the British Army and I'd had these near-death experiences. And when it came to the direct commands of Jesus, love your enemies, you've heard it said an eye for an eye for a tooth and a tooth for a tooth.
Yes.
But I tell you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. I started this exploration at theological college thinking, do you know what, Andrew? You cannot with integrity stand up in a pulpit and preach the words of Jesus unless you have taken up your cross. Jesus says, if anyone has been my followers, take up your cross and follow me. Unless you've taken up your cross of pain, of suffering, of trauma, of near-death experience, of traumatic grief, and the loss of your friends, unless you are willing to explore what it means to love your enemies. Now, at that point, I wasn't mature enough to see that my enemies were my emotions or psychological issues. I was just a young man. I was in my late 20s. I had a very, very clear enemy at that point, the IRA, the INLA, Republicans.
Yeah.
I didn't hate them as people. I didn't even know, really. I mean, I had photographs and all the rest of it in Cull Island and Newry and South Armagh. I didn't know them as personalities. But if you said, who's your enemy in life? Well, these people have tried to kill me and they tried to, so they weren't an enemy in that I hated them as personalities, but in terms of an enemy that had done something to me, even if it was my own choice by becoming a British Army officer, I'm not blaming them or anything like that. But I thought, you know what? That is what's distinctive about you, Andrew. That is what, in terms of the globe and your place in the jigsaw puzzle of life, is your 2.5 years operational experience in Northern Ireland and all that went on there.
Yeah.
Your 6 months with the United Nations in Bosnia, paving the way for the Dayton Peace Agreement, breaking the siege of Sarajevo, what you saw there in terms of poverty, in terms of suffering, in terms of all that, and what you saw in terms of so-called Christians, whether it be the Serbian Orthodox Christians, collaborating, or with the Croat Catholic Christians, fighting Muslims. What you saw of humanity and the way that humanity is coerced and manipulated, even under the banner of religion. What you saw there in 1995, what you saw again as an intelligence officer in 1997, when you went back and you were exposed to the suffering of people, of mass graves, people come to you saying, these are my loved ones and they're in this grave and what are you going to do about it? All that sort of stuff. That is what's distinctive about you. That is what your calling is related to, not to being a nice vicar or anything like that. This is where you need to go. So I started to explore that theologically. And when I was in London, I became aware of a place called St Ethelburgers. And it was reopened in 2002, I think it was. And I was in London so I started in London 2002. And I was aware of this place called St Ethelburgers, right in the heart of the city of London, in Bishopsgate in London, that had been reopened under the guidance of the Bishop of London, Richard Charteris, who ordained me as deacon in St Paul's Cathedral, in collaboration with Cardinal Hume, who was the head of the Catholic Church in England or in London at the time, two very prominent church people. It was reopened under their guidance, under the vision of Richard Charteris, by Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, to be a centre for reconciliation and peace. Now, what was this place, St Ethelburgers? St Ethelburgers was a tiny little church in the heart of the financial centre of London, which was almost completely destroyed in the most expensive IRA bomb in 1993, right in the heart of London, which really got the attention of the government.
Yeah.
Because if you attack the money, if you attack the means to make money, you can attack shopping centres, you can, attack seaside resorts, you can attack all sorts of stuff. It's when you start to attack the means to make money, sustain yourself, attract forest investment and all, the coffers, then you really get their attention. So I was aware of this place and I thought, you know what? I also have a link with the IRA, So they destroyed St Ethelburga's. They probably didn't know St Ethelburga's existed.
Yeah.
I've been ordained by the Bishop of London. I have a link with him. I'm going to go and say hello. So I'd also at that point started to explore my own pain and my own trauma and this whole business of loving your enemies. But also I thought, you know what, I need to find out, I need to go through the fear barrier and come to terms with all that fear and that trauma of Northern Ireland. Okay. Because, trauma doesn't go away. It's just this endless record. So for a family contact, I went back to South Armagh. And actually for a journalist, a family contact and a journalist, I was put in touch with a Sinn Féin councillor in Newry called Pat McGinn. Now, interestingly, Pat McGinn's son is in the news at the moment because Pat McGinn's son is an MP, a Labour MP in England, and he is the person that's been tabling and pushing for the abortion and same-sex marriage changes to take place. Okay, Conor McGinn, originally from Bedsbrook or the Camla in South Armagh, the son of Pat McGinn. Anyway, I've learned that subsequently. So I met Pat McGinn. I flew over from London and I met Pat McGinn in Newry. He picked me up from the airport. I knew Pat McGinn. I had his, it was called the montages. I had his photograph. I'm pretty certain he drove a black Mini. I had his the VRN, vehicle registration number of his car. I knew where he lived. He was a person that if we ever met him, as far as we were concerned, he was linked to the IRA. Yes. Okay, it's not for me to say whether he is or he wasn't, but he was a Sinn Féin councillor. Okay. Yeah. So I went and, there's a big story to this, but I went and I met Pat McGinn. And the key part of this was I wanted to go and show some love and listen to someone who effectively had been my enemy. Yeah. Okay, albeit I was paid and, I was told he's your enemy. But he was my enemy because, my friends had died. 1st of May 1992, a good friend of mine had died just south of Newry in a bomb that came along the railway line. Anyway, I think the significance of that was is that I just went around in Pat McGinn's car. Now, nobody knew. I didn't make contact with any security services. I thought, Andrew, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do this as a human being, trusting in your own faith. This cannot be, anything you're doing with any security apparatus, with anyone. So I just did this as a human being. Wow. So that all the power was coming from me. I was empowering myself by doing this and coming from my faith. Okay. And I travelled around Newry, and Pat took me to see his friends and his relatives and people who'd had experiences, his loved ones who'd had experiences of, I suppose, what we might call the Troubles. He told me about his own experiences and his own encounters with the British Army. And most significantly, he told me about his best friend. And he took me to the grave of his best friend. Now, the army was still in South Armagh at this point. This wasn't the end of Operation Banner, as we've learned.
What year was this, Andrew?
This was probably 2003. It was pre-IRA decommissioning. I think it was probably 2003, 2004, something like that. I mean, I could go home and find bits of paper. But something, we talk about that
early
sort of
2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s. Most significantly, he took me to the grave of his best friend. And what he showed me was, and this was in Camla, as much as I remember, and he showed me that every time his best friend's mother visited the grave, that she was being watched by the towers up on Camla Mountain.
Oh, okay.
And for the first time, I suppose, I was able to sort of get it and put myself in his shoes and in the shoes of that community. And his best friend was Raymond McCreish, who had died on hunger strike. So given all the sort of, given how much attention perhaps that family would have got because of Raymond McCreish's, past and everything else, I suppose I could now see, I'm starting to understand a little of when these people talk about the invader, when they talk about being oppressed, all this sort of stuff. I might think this is a United Kingdom, but when they talk about that and they go back through their family history and everything else and their own pain, I'm starting to get a little bit of this. Okay. So I was doing that sort of thing, and then I went to St Ethelburgers with my story, and I met the then director of St Ethelburgers, who was a former British ambassador, the ambassador to the Ukraine, first director of St Ethelburgers Centre for Reconciliation and Peace. And I said, look, my understanding is that the Bishopsgate bomb, well, we know it was an IRA bomb, but my understanding is that Bishopsgate bomb, I've got no proof of this, but my understanding is it almost certainly came from South Armagh, you know? Mm-hmm. I have contacts within South Armagh. I've been building up relationships with people who, in fact, at that point, I built relationships up, or I'd had contact with former IRA combatants, you know, even possibly even former IRA hunger strikers at that point. But I've got one particular contact, a guy called Pat McGinn. He's a Sinn Féin councillor. In fact, maybe at that point, he was even the mayor of Newry District Council. I said, how about I link you with them?
Yeah.
You know? And so you're a Centre for Reconciliation and Peace. Your origins is this IRA bomb.
Yeah.
How about I link you effectively, directly or indirectly, with the IRA or Sinn Féin in South Armagh, you see. So he said, okay. And what we then did was, now again, I can't remember all the dates. This could have been 2004, 2000. I can't remember. So again, at the time, we did a walk of the Ring of Gullion Way, a sponsored walk of the Ring of Gullion Way, and this was to raise money for a charity that I've become connected to called Crossfire Trust, which operates near Keady near Darkley in Armagh, or South Armagh. And we did this walk of the Ring of Gullion Way, and it was myself. I was the main lead. I sort of set this thing up in cooperation with people in South Armagh, with the knowledge of Pat McGinn, liaising with people in Crossmaglen, and with the full knowledge of Terry Hurty, who was a Sinn Féin councillor in Crossmaglen. I think prior to that, actually, we'd flown across and we met Conor Murphy. I'd flown across with Roland Smith, the ambassador, and we'd met Conor Murphy, listened to his story, his interpretation of the Troubles and everything else in Crossmaglen. So we'd had these sort of engagements. We had met with also the people who'd survived the Kings, or relatives of those who'd been killed at Kingsmill. So it wasn't just, we weren't just meeting with Republicans, we were also meeting with people like Danny Kennedy of the Ulster Unionist Party, and people who'd been in, people, Unionists, Protestants who'd been bereaved and traumatized. Anyway, we did this walk of the Ring of Gullion Way, and it received some media attention. And I went, and another veteran friend of mine went. He'd been in the British Army, in fact, one of the first soldiers into Derry in 1969. We went, and Roland Smith and a group from England went. And we met up with Pat McGinn, and Pat McGinn joined us, and we walked all the way around the Ring of Gullion, which goes sort of from Newry, and then Jonesborough, Forkhill, and all the rest of it. The towers were up. And all the rest of it. And so that started something. So going back to when I was told, British Army chaplaincy is not for you, and what am I going to do now?
Yes.
I then decided, and the way was paved, or there was an opening for me to come to Northern Ireland and to continue this peace and reconciliation work.
Fantastic.
And I came over and I got a job with the Crossfire, this organisation called the Crossfire Trust. Okay. And they said, look, we'll fund you for a year. Took my wife, and at that point we had 3 children. We'll fund you for a year, and then in that time you can get yourself self-funded with peace money, because there was all this peace money around the place. Yeah,
all coming in from the EU, wasn't it?
Yeah, coming in from the EU. So this was in 2005. So I moved across with my wife and my 3 children, and I continued this work in a much more proactive way, working for the Crossfire Trust. I got involved in meetings in Belfast for an organisation called Healing Through Remembering, and I started to build up a bit of portfolio, and basically paved the way for a funding application where I could continue this work. And the main work I was doing, I suppose, was bringing British Army veterans to places where they had patrolled, and particularly where they'd been bereaved or they had some sort of traumatic experience. So I'd built up relationships with former combatants, Republicans in West Belfast, up in Derry, in the Bogside, in South Armagh, in different areas. And I was just bringing one or two veterans across, and we were hosted by former IRA, INLA combatants. So there's one prominent organisation called Coistja. There's another prominent organisation called Chapter Fulcher, which is the INLA, the RSP on the Falls Road. Coistja's Beechmount Avenue, that would be the IRA. And so we were taken different places, different tours around, and then this veteran will be able to say, well, this is where I was, and this is where, so-and-so got blown up, or this is why I had this experience. And so the idea was that in some way, a bit like me, I'd done this myself, they'd be able to break through the fear, break through the trauma, empower themselves. Outside of some sort of clinical diagnosis or sat in a room somewhere in England, with counselling. There's nothing wrong with that. But they effectively be able to sort of walk again and send a very strong message to themselves. It's okay. And you know why it's okay? Because the man, or it's women, I was women former combatants as well, and ex-prisoners. But the man or the woman that you're with and you're talking with, back in the day was your enemy, but right now they're saying, do you know what? We are committed to peace. We didn't really get into politics, but we're committed to peace, and we want to make it work. And we're, so I was in secret talks in Clonard Monastery, all sorts of stuff. So I took this job with the Crossfire Trust. The thing was, and this is very personal to me, and I don't say this lightly, my marriage ended during that time. In fact, I ended my marriage during that time. All was not going well. And it's a terrible heartache to me because I ended my marriage, which meant that I became separated from 3 of my children.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. Yeah,
very, 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 very tough. But the thing was, just prior to that, all around that time, my funding application had been successful. And the Crossfire Trust had been awarded, I think, something like £330,000 for a 3-year project that I would head up to continue this work. You think this is 2005 now. To continue this work, bringing British Army veterans back to West Belfast, South Armagh, the Bogside, these sort of really prominent flashpoints. But when I went to the director and said, look, my marriage has ended and we're separating, he said, well, Andrew, we're a Christian organisation and we cannot condone that, and we're a Christian organisation. And so therefore, we'd like you to resign. And I was like, oh, well, I don't have anything. I mean, I've given everything up to do this.
To do this job.
I'm living in a house that we're renting from you. I've spent all this last year in order to build this up, and I've been awarded funding. Well, he said, oh, I'm sorry, we'd like you to resign. I said, well, I'm not going to resign. I'm going to see out my contract. I think this was maybe in November. I'm going to see out my contract till March, because otherwise, what am I going to do? Now, my wife, she went back to where she'd grown up in Northern Ireland with the children. And I then stayed on in this house, but they turned down the funding. I mean, can you imagine any organisation at that time turning down £330,000 worth of funding? And the thing was, this was going to be matched by other funding for a Cooperation Island, right? This was linked in St Ethelberg Centre for Reconciliation and Peace. No, they turned down the funding, basically in order to say, we're no longer associated with Andrew Rawding, even though...
That's crazy.
Anyway.
And all this because you couldn't be their ideal poster boy, essentially?
Well, or what I was doing wasn't, maybe there was some ego involved in this. Andrew Rawding was becoming more prominent than the director.
Yeah, there could be a lot of that too.
All this sort of stuff, you see. So anyway, come March, I became homeless.
Wow.
Because now, I was working, actually, I was managing to maintain my sort of priestly role in the Church of Ireland Church in Armagh. Just on a Sunday by Sunday basis. They gave me a very small honorarium. God bless the rector there, who looked after me in that sense. He kept me going as a reverend, gave me this opportunity to continue as a reverend. Celebrating the Eucharist, doing some pastoral work, preaching, leading services on a Sunday, And so when I was basically told, well, we're no longer paying you and you can no longer live in the house, I became homeless. And I went into a housing association house on Barrack Hill in Armagh. I tried to get a job in the Church of Ireland, but it was very difficult because, I was in interviews and they want to know where my wife was and who's going to make the cup of tea,
Yes.
And at that point we weren't divorced. So there were all those complexities. So no one really wanted to touch me.
Yeah.
Plus I've been doing this reconciliation work and, that went against the grain. So it's not funny. I lived in this home. There were some very good parishioners who would come and even bring me coal.
Yeah.
I had no oven. I was now in survival mode as a former British Army officer. I had no oven. We had a camping stove. I used this camping stove. I kept butter cold on the windowsill. I actually went out, I had a bow store and a rucksack, and I used to go around Armagh and I used to cut wood in the darkness, go out and cut wood that I found at the side of roads and then bring it back, then use that to heat up the fire, you see? And at the same time, I'm getting on a bus to go and see my 3 children. I used to sleep. I had a tent or something. I used to go and sleep in order to wake up on a Saturday and get some time with them and all the rest of it. Anyway.
Wow.
I then went on job seekers allowance because I couldn't get the Bishop of London actually supported me for so long. St. Ethelburgers tried to get around this funding thing, but no, the funding had been allocated to that organisation, therefore we cannot reallocate it to you. So I then went on job seekers allowance. So I'm an ordained Anglican priest. I'm a former British Army officer. I'm now on job seekers allowance, living in a housing association house in Barrack Street in Armagh, just down from Gough Barracks. I have 3 children. I can't even support my wife, my former wife. I have 3 children who are now wondering, why is Daddy no longer part of our family in another part of Northern Ireland? I've got enough money for a bus ticket to go and see them. I'm hovering at the Sainsbury's counter, waiting for the yellow labels to go on in order to get the reduced food. And I'm thinking this is, things are going well in terms of the power of love and my love for my children and the power of my own faith. And, everything's going to work out. But, financially, this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I'd also been having contact with Vietnam veterans in America and who'd been through some crazy stuff. And in fact, there was nothing I'd done or nothing I was doing right then in terms of sort of as a Christian separating from my wife that they hadn't already done.
Yeah.
And some of them had been Vietnam veterans who then become priests or they'd been chaplains in the Vietnam War and they had been there, seen it, done it. PTSD, everything, alcoholism, breakup. So they had been really supporting me, and in one sense, they were the only group out there that I knew they were going to love me unconditionally.
Yeah.
When, of course, I told my parents that I was separating, it was like, there was all judgment, and all your children to become drug addicts, and all the rest of it. And this is what happens to children of divorcees, and all the rest of it. And you're bringing judgment yourself. What does God think of all this? So there was no unconditional love for my family or anything like that. But I was getting this unconditional love from America, from these few Vietnam veterans. And one of them actually was a former US Marine. He'd been in Beirut. And he said, Andrew, why don't you go for the Royal Marines? Royal Marines. And I thought, actually, before I'd even joined the British Army, I thought about the Royal Marines because Prince Edward was trying for the Royal Marines and had failed. And as a young man, I thought, Prince Edward can't hack it, but I can do that. But my eyesight wasn't good enough. So I couldn't go into the Royal Marines. So it was 20/20 vision. There was no laser eye surgery at that point. But I thought, what? Okay. So I thought, well, okay, perhaps I can be a chaplain to the Royal Marines, you know, padre in the Royal Marines. Not the British Army, but it's the army within the Royal Navy. It's an elite force, you know, in terms of how people perceive them. So I made contact with the Royal Navy chaplaincy because, you know, if I wanted to be a padre of the Royal Marines, I had to be a chaplain within the Royal Navy, you see. Mm-hmm. Well, they just bit my arm off. And I went over, I had an interview with them, and it was the end of... So I've been doing this sort of thing for maybe a couple of years. And it was the end of 2007, I think it was, that I joined the Royal Navy as a chaplain. And this meant going to England, and I went to the Britannia. So I'd already been commissioned from Sandhurst, Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and now I was going to go to the Royal Britannia Naval College in Devon, you know, and go through that training. And then I was commissioned as a Royal Navy officer, but as a chaplain. And so I spent some time in ships, anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden. I saw all the poverty in and around piracy, Somalia, Djibouti, Oman, all this sort of, you know, the terrible poverty. And what sort of drives these people to piracy, or the control that they, you know, they're really just serving bigger masters, all that sort of stuff. We shot and killed a couple of Somali pirates. We also killed a Yemeni fisherman. I was involved in all that, trying to bring dignity to Muslims floating around in the Gulf of Aden in terrible heat, wrapping their bodies in white sheets in order to give them some dignity. All this sort of stuff as a Royal Navy chaplain on the front line, anti-piracy operations. Then I went to the Royal Marines, and I did the Royal Marine training in order to get the Green Beret. So, you know, that's a very sort of, you get your Green Beret, it's like a hat you wear. Yeah. Then, you know, you set yourself apart from other people because it shows you're very fit, you're very determined, you can crawl through a lot of mud, you know. You can crawl through a lot of mud and tunnels filled with water.
I'm sure there's Marines listening to this going, Andrew, you could be explaining this a little better, I think.
And doing press-ups on the beach and basically get shouted at a lot, and you can hang from ropes and monkey bars and swing this and swing that. You know, I mean, it's tough. It is tough. And fair play to any Royal Marine. So I did that, but I mean, I was just fortunate. I did that. I think I got I did the 30 miler on Dartmoor. It's a sort of isolated place in southern England, Dartmoor, you know, very moorland, a bit like the Sperrins. Yeah. And the final thing is you carry a lot of kit, and then you walk for 30 miles, you know, run 30 miles. I did that, I think, on my 39th birthday, but I had marathons in my legs, and I had it up here. Yeah.
That's what's most important.
You see, I had it up here, so I wasn't like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, like, oh my God, what's this pain? I can't endure this. I knew I could endure pain. Anyway, so I got through that, and what I've been thinking, actually, while I was in Northern Ireland was, in one sense, in terms of the British Army and care for veterans, you see, I still had this real heart for veterans, that the young men who had followed this pretty full-on platoon commander, had been in some very dangerous situations with him and had managed to survive. You know, I was thinking about their well-being, but I had thought to myself, if you join the Royal Navy and you go with the Royal Marines, you need to go to Afghanistan. Because then if you have experience in Afghanistan, it's not just Northern Ireland, which has become almost old hat. I mean, politically relevant, but in terms of it, veterans' experiences and trauma really have become forgotten with the war in Iraq taking precedence and the war of Afghanistan. So if you get yourself to Afghanistan, then you're going to get more combat experience. And in terms of being a peacemaker, in terms of being able to have credibility, if you want to bring peace to veterans, if that's the future you're going to go down, then that would be good. So what happened was I got my Green Beret and I joined a Royal Marine Commando unit called 40 Commando Royal Marines, based in Taunton in England. And I went to Afghanistan in 2010. And it was in a place called Sangin in Helmand province, which was the most dangerous place anyone in the British Armed Forces
could ever
have been, in Helmand province, in Sangin in Helmand province. So I don't know the numbers, but if you look at where the majority, if you're looking for a place where the majority of British Armed Forces have been killed in Afghanistan, it will be in Sangin.
Right.
Okay. So I went there, and my approach was this: I will go wherever the Royal Marines go.
Okay.
I will put myself in as much danger as them. Not carrying a weapon. I mean, it's against UK Parliament for a chaplain to carry a weapon. I had a stick, which I got in South Africa when I was in the British Army. Zmalakala de Solhe Para. That was local language, maybe Pashtun. My stick is a sign of peace. So I went with the Royal Marines wherever I could, just carrying this stick. And I wanted to be there. If anyone got blown up, if anyone got shot, I wanted to be there to hold their hand, to sort of, so that I could just give them love. Because the thing is, my experience is that when a British Army soldier or whatever is dying, so often they start to think about loved ones, of course, and they're separated from mum, and it's a very harsh environment. So I wanted to be there spiritually. I wanted to be there as a human being. I wanted to be there as a father of children. I wanted to be there as a parent and everything else. So it was horrendous. 14 Royal Marines were killed. Now, that's the most Royal Marines have been killed since Malaya. Now, I know some people say, well, that, unlucky Royal Marines for going to Afghanistan, you shouldn't be there. If we take away the politics, we just look at this from a human point of view. 14 Royal Marines were killed. Maybe another 7 British Army who were working with us in that local area were killed. Afghan soldiers were killed. Afghan police were killed. Of course, Afghans were killed. And I can tell you story after story about that. But the thing was, it was horrendous. And I saw more war. I saw more human suffering. I saw the destruction of people's lives. I saw again the people of different religions being turned against each other, almost Christian versus Muslim. Saw so many things. And at the end of that, I did a great job. I did a great job. I did as much as I could.
Yes.
And at the end of that, I could have gone on to do another job somewhere else and then gone on and on and on. And I thought, no. Actually, while I was in Afghanistan, I was communicating with my first wife. Now, I'd remarried by then. I was communicating with my first wife and about the well-being of my first 3 children, who at that point would have been aged maybe 8, 10 and 12, or 8, 10 and 11. Girl, boy, boy. And I asked about my youngest son, how is he? And I was getting these messages back. Now, at this point, I had made sure that I was trained in suicide awareness and suicide prevention. I've made absolutely clear to my chaplaincy, I'm not going in any ship. I'm not going anywhere unless I am trained.
Because it'll be highly relevant in situations
like
that.
Yeah. Now, this wasn't something that was chaplains were told to do. I mean, you're all supposed to, just bring Jesus to people. No, I'm not going to just quote Bible verses. I'm not going to say trite stuff. I want to be trained.
Yes.
So at that point, I was trained in suicide alertness and suicide prevention, applied suicide intervention skills training.
Yes.
And I was seeing these emails about my youngest son. I thought, I don't like the look of this. So I asked a direct question.
Yes.
You sense suicide, gut feeling, you're picking up the invitations. You ask a direct question. Is he suicidal? Yes. So I'm now in Afghanistan, and I have an 8-year-old boy back somewhere in Northern Ireland. The mum is rebuilding relationships, quite right. That's what she would do. That's what she must do. But my son is probably watching the news and seeing a Royal Marine killed every day.
Yes.
I'm thinking, my dad's there. Where is my dad? Where do I fit into this new relationship? Where do I fit into this life? Where do I fit in? The pain is too great. Suicide. So after I'd done Afghanistan, I thought, do you know what? My priority now is not Army Chaplain or Royal Navy Chaplain or Royal Marine Commando Padre or any of that sort of great stuff which is about labels. Mm-hmm. My priority is my relationship with my children.
Yes.
My priority is as a father. So I think maybe I went home. I remember I went home and I actually went to, I mean, this is later actually, you know, my son, there was something going on at his school and I went and saw the principal. My son, this was the same son, said to the school principal said, "Oh, it must be nice to see your dad." He said, "Oh yeah, whenever we see dad, it's like Christmas. We only ever see him twice a year." I thought, oh my goodness. You know, it pierces your heart, doesn't it?
Yeah.
My own son is saying when he sees dad, it's like Christmas and we only ever see him twice a year.
Yeah.
So I decided my priority is my children. So I thought I've got to get back to Northern Ireland. You know, I've got to find a job in Northern Ireland. I could have gone and worked in Tesco's. I could have gone and worked, you know, I could have just got any old job.
Anything to get you.
Yeah, anything to get me back. But I did think, you know what, this faith you have, this calling you have, there's something about it which is rich. There's something about it which, you know, you're now part of the jigsaw puzzle of the globe. Yes. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, I've now got Afghanistan. I'm now part of global suffering, geopolitical games, all the rest of it. So I started to apply for churches for a job in the Church of Ireland. You see, I was turned down. I was getting feedback. It's because you're divorced. You know, there's certain dioceses within the Church of Ireland, particularly in Northern Ireland, that won't touch you. Mm-hmm. If you're divorced, the bishop just won't touch you. We're not going to, you know, we won't. Now, you can get divorced while you're in the job. Yeah, and I'm sure they'd have compassion. But if you're coming in as a divorcee, no. Yeah. You know, we don't believe in divorce. It's against the Bible. So I was getting feedback from people where you're divorced. Then, of course, I did at that point have a profile as someone who's been involved in peace and reconciliation work and, you know, all that sort of stuff. You Googled me, you'd have found me. So I was getting all that. And I was in a Royal Fleet auxiliary ship bobbing around off the coast of Albania, right? We were doing an exercise on one of the islands, Albanian islands, with the Royal Marines as, I don't know, part of NATO or something like that. And I was Googling, still looking for jobs, and this job came up, Cull Island. And actually, I mean, I knew Cull Island. Yeah. And the funny thing was, I'd actually met the rector of Cull Island in the Houses of Parliament some years before at some sort of prayer breakfast or something to do with, you know, Christians in Parliament or something like this. And he was over there with a Catholic priest from the Cull Island area, and they were doing like sort of peace and reconciliation. And I met him, and he'd said, "Oh, I'm I've met him, you know, Anglican priest to Anglican priest." And he said, "Oh, well, you know, you won't have ever heard where I'm from. I'm from a place called Cull Island." And I said, "Well, I do know Cull Island."
Little did he know.
Yeah. So I thought, well, obviously he's left, he's moved on, and there's a vacancy in Cull Island. And my don't take this the wrong way, the people of Cull Island, right?
Oh no.
My thought was, if God has got a sense of humor, I will roll the dice one more time. Yeah. This will be it. Okay. I think at that point I'd been turned down by maybe 5 or 6. I'd even flown over and just basically even from the airport to the parish being, it was clear I was just being a tick in the box. Yeah. They didn't want me at all. It was an inside job, you see? And they were just ticking the box and bringing someone over from England just to say we've interviewed a few other people. Yeah. But it was an inside job, you see? So I got tired of these inside jobs, and I was thinking, you know what? One last throw of the dice. And if you know, not quite if God exists or if God is involved in this at all, I'll go for this. You see? It's all part of life's rich tapestry, isn't it? So I applied for the job in Cull Island, and my wife and I, we flew over or whatever it was, and I went for the interview, and I just met some really very warm-hearted, conscientious, committed Church of Ireland people from the parishes of Brackerville, Donahendra, and Ballyclog.
Yes.
Okay, and they were great. And I visited all the parishes, but it's not actually necessarily just what the people in the parishes. The final say isn't with them. It goes to a diocesan level, and the bishop oversees that. You see.
Okay.
So I thought, well, I'm getting on well at the parish level.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing was that while I'd been in Armagh, I'd been involved in peace and reconciliation work between the two cathedrals.
Okay.
That's St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cathedral and St. Patrick's Church of Ireland Cathedral.
Yeah.
And so I'd come to the attention of the Archbishop, the Primate of all Ireland, on both sides actually, but particularly from the Church of Ireland. So when my name, and this is my understanding, I haven't had the conversation with him, but when my name came on the table with all the great and the good of the Diocese of Armagh, thinking, right, what are the parish interviewees got to bring to us in terms of people they're considering? When my name came on the table, and I don't know who else was applying for this, my understanding is that the Archbishop of Armagh, the then Archbishop of Armagh, saw my name, knew of me, and decided that he would support. I don't know how it works, but anyway, I got a phone call. I was in Taunton, and I got a phone call from the Archbishop of Armagh. Andrew, we'd like to offer you the place in Brackerville, Donahendra, and Ballyclog. Will you accept it?
Fantastic.
So I never, ever, ever thought, one, given my upbringing, which was sort of out of the established church, one would ever be wearing one of these,
Yes.
would be a reverend.
Yeah.
Within the Church of England initially, and then within the Church of Ireland.
Yeah.
And I never, ever thought that I would be a Church of Ireland rector in Island, having that been the first place I'd ever patrolled in August 1991. So I'm very sorry. You'll have worked out that I'm quite good at talking. But, and maybe you asked me one question, which is like, how did you become a man of the cloth and how did you end up in Island? So that was short.
That's the abridged version.
That was the abridged. No, that's pretty much.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much the story, and I think I'm just about coming to terms with being in Island, and that's nothing to do with the people of Island.
And how long you've been there? 2011 is what I read in Google. Is
that's
that
right.
Correct?
Yeah. So December 2011. So in fact, December.
Right at the end of the year. So,
yeah. So I think December this year, the 6th of December this year, I will have been the rector for eight years. And in that time I've actually again divorced and remarried.
Okay.
And I've had more children, so I'm the father of 7 children.
Fantastic.
3 live in one location, 2 live in another, and then I have 2 children in the rectory. And this is a really a beautiful part of the story, and it's not to say that my first 2 wives weren't amazing, in their own ways. But when I was, now here's a story for you. When I was in the British Army as a young officer, when I first came over in 1991-92, I was in a relationship with my first ever girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
Just the loveliest, sweetest young girl, and who just loved me so dearly. And we were boyfriend, girlfriend, and in 1992, she came over actually to Northern Ireland for a ball and all the rest of it down in the army base down in County Down, a place called Ballykinler. On the 29th of January, I'd had Island. I'd also been in Newry in 1991. We'd survived bombing, direct bombing in Newry in 1991. 29th of January 1992, the IRA fired, we call it a Mark 12 mortar. Basically, it's a horizontal missile from the grounds of St. Paul's Catholic Church in Lurgan at my Land Rover as I just travelled through the Catholic traffic lights. And I'd never been in that area before, but clearly patrols had been in that area before, and we were helping out the army in that area on a sort of, just on a 24-hour, help them out type thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, So they fired this missile, and really, I should be dead. The only reason why I'm not dead is that the missile, we'll call it a missile, hit a concrete fence post instead of my Land Rover.
Okay.
So slugs of concrete went into the Land Rover. I can show you pictures in front of my knees. You know, I can still picture the glass coming in, the orange flash and everything else. One of my soldiers was injured, but I survived that. But of course, that was traumatic. I didn't realise it was traumatic, but I survived that.
Yeah. What age were you when that happened?
I would have been 21, but I probably looked about 14. You know?
Well, they say your frontal lobe doesn't really grow when it plays.
No, you're absolutely right. In terms of the neuroscience, your frontal lobe and your hippocampus and
so
all that.
You wouldn't have really took on board what was
No,
really
your prefrontal
happening,
cortex, in terms of, you know, working that out. What you're doing is you're working it out sort of rationally, maybe, or trying to work it out rationally, but you're not working it out emotionally.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just in survival mode. I do what I need to do as a professional soldier. But that had an impact on me. I didn't realise it. Then actually my girlfriend came over in February 1992. There's a story there. But on the 1st of May 1992, I was south of Newry in a big checkpoint. And the IRA they converted a van and put it on the railway line. And they rolled us down the railway line at Clog. And boom. And 6 minutes past 2 on the 1st of May 1992, the bomb went off. 1,000 kilograms of explosives. My bedroom collapsed in on me. A very good friend of mine was killed. Okay. And it was very traumatic. I was the young officer in the base at the time. I was in denial about the whole thing. I still, although I told my soldiers, my own soldiers, to pick up his body and take it to the helicopter, I still cannot picture it. But I must. It must be somewhere in my brain. Yeah. His body and all that sort of thing. Okay. Anyway. So that I just sort of hid in that sort of deep, dark wardrobe and kept going as a professional army officer. I don't even told my girlfriend at the time about that. Anyway, after that, I think in maybe June, July that year, I got home on leave and I went with my girlfriend. We went on holiday to the Lake District. And I borrowed my brother's car and we were going up the M6 through Staffordshire. And I asked my girlfriend, where are we on the map? And she showed me on the map. I'm driving. She showed me on the map. I looked over to look at the map. The car hit the side of a lorry. The car overturned in the outside lane of the motorway. And we span, suspended by our seatbelts, over and above the glass sunroof, which disintegrated. We span, for no exaggeration, maybe 50, 100 meters on the outside lane of the motorway, upside down, right? My girlfriend had put her hands to her head to try and protect her head. She had scarring in her hand. She lost her hair, which was just literally, I can still picture the gravel coming in. She lost her hair, which was ground away by the tarmac. Anyway, the thing was, that was all very traumatic. It led to me becoming a very hard-hearted, ruthless person. Yeah. In order to survive emotionally and psychologically, thinking that I'm a very dangerous person. If you're with me, and my soldiers actually used to say this, if you're with me, you're going to find yourself in danger.
Yeah, like you're a bad luck charm kind of thing.
Something like that. Yeah. But I seem to be surviving these things. And what happened was it had an impact on that relationship with my girlfriend, and I cut her off.
Oh, you ended it yourself?
Yeah, I ended it.
Yeah.
She was incredibly nice, amazingly nice, but I had no place for niceness because I'm now caught up in ruthlessness.
Yeah, you're in survival mode.
I'm in survival mode. I think, you harden your heart. Violence had been injected in me. I think violence was injected into me during my childhood. But violence had been injected in me, not just through my childhood. It's taken me years to come to terms with that. But the violence of being in Northern Ireland had been injected in me. Yes. And in my heart, I became so cold and so hardened that I was willing to kill. Mm-hmm. And that meant cutting off anything which was going to be impacted by who I was becoming. Yeah. Through trauma, survival mode and everything else. So I cut this beautiful, kind-hearted, loving, very innocent girl off. Yes. And of course, she was absolutely traumatized by this car crash, and that had an impact on her in terms of her studies. And then she found herself in a domestic violence situation for 20 years, you know, because she was vulnerable and someone took advantage of her. And anyway, the amazing thing is that after all that, we got back together. And so she lives with me and we're married.
Wow.
In the rectory.
That's amazing.
In Northern Ireland.
How did you rekindle, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've been in a job which has given me the space for a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah.
Now, if I'd have stayed in the military, I mean, as a padre, I had a lot of space as well. Mm-hmm. But if I'd have stayed in the machine, you know, the military machine, it doesn't matter. You know, when you're working for organizations where they need to make a profit or they need to prove themselves in some way, you've got to just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to meet deadlines. You've got to be better than anyone else. So I'd come out of that. And I suppose, you know, thinking theologically, wrestling with the words of Jesus, wrestling with who I am, where I've come from, my own sense of self-awareness, wrestling with the pastoral needs of my parish and all the rest of it. Not trying to sort of be there in the darkness, acknowledging my own darkness. Yes. You know, I'd find myself in floods of tears, just driving along the motorway or listening to a Coldplay song or at a funeral. Something would trigger something, and I knew that there was something going on, you see. And also, I found it so easy to break relationships with two women who'd loved me, who'd given up everything for me. Careers to follow me to Germany or follow me to Somerset or whatever thing, who'd given birth to my children, going through all the pain of that. And I found it so easy to just end it, you know? So I'm like, what is going on here? You know, what is this a sexual orientation issue? You know, all sorts of stuff. What is going on? Is there stuff that you're not aware of? And it was like this slow moving, I describe it as this slow moving missile was coming from the depths of the ocean, coming up to this little boat that was trying to survive as a rector in Cull Island, who really had no idea what he was doing. Steep learning curve in terms of being in Cull Island, as a Church of Ireland rector, with all the needs of the parishioners, with the politics and the social cultural aspects of all that. Anyway, so this slow moving missile was coming from the deepest, darkest ocean, and it pierced the hull of my little dinghy. And it was my first love. And it wasn't just my first love, actually. It was the realization of what I had done to that beautiful, innocent girl who'd given everything to me. Yeah. You know? And I'm thinking, preaching to my parishioners about hurting people and blah, and I'm thinking the pain you put that person through. And so I researched, I found a contact, and I sent a message, and it was basically a message saying, I acknowledge the pain I put you through. Yeah. I know that you're married. I know you have 5 children. I'm not wanting to do anything in terms of your marriage or anything like that. I'm not wanting to produce any more pain for you. I'm just wanting to acknowledge that I put you through terrible pain. Yeah. And I'm sort of asking for your I want to acknowledge it, and I'm asking for your forgiveness. Yeah. Don't even have to forgive me. I just need to make contact. You have no right. I have no right to be forgiven by you. I just need to say, I suppose, I'm sorry or something like that.
It must have been a hard message for you to write.
Well, I think the thing is, you might say it was a selfish message for me to write. Because I'm trying, this is the thing about all this whole forgiveness stuff, is a lot of it is very selfish. Yeah. This is me trying to sort of break the chains and trying to do the right thing, maybe to ease some of my own pain. Yeah. Let's be honest about this sort of stuff. So I suppose I've come to an understanding this is what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. This is about common humanity. This is about giving something back. This is about acknowledging what you've done. This is about freeing the other person up from anything that they might think that was their fault or they were to blame or anything. That sort of, there's complexity to this. Anyway, what happened was I made contact and I heard nothing, right? And I thought, okay, fair enough, Yeah. And actually, I was open about this, in terms of my close relationships at that time. And then I got this message from a relative saying, you will find a message here. And this is because my first girlfriend was in a controlling, abusive, psychologically abusive, controlling relationship.
Yes.
So therefore, any messages had to come from an intermediary.
Okay.
So then when we made contact, it was just like, it's like the whole thing collapses. Everything that had been built up, it just, we're now back, and it's, we're back at being teenagers or whatever, for both good and bad. But, suddenly I'm thinking, in terms of my relationship with a woman, there's nothing more powerful.
Yes.
Now, that might sound horrendous in terms of, my love for my wife and her love for me and our children and everything else. But I just knew I couldn't.
You couldn't just let this go?
Well, and I couldn't, I suppose it had been hidden, you see? And it was powerful.
Yeah.
It's the power of, it's the power of love, even if it's love for yourself.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If I was to dissect it and say, well, actually, it's more about love for yourself, Andrew, than love for anyone else. But, that's where it was at. So anyway, so obviously there's a lot of heartache involved in that. But Loveday, that's my wife's name. Loveday and I are back together. And I suppose the thing is that it takes me back to my childhood. It takes me back to my teenage years. When you talk about the prefrontal cortex or, neuroscience and upbringing and everything else. I mean, Loveday would say to me, I loved you when I was 8 and you were 12. And when we first got together, I knew that you were in pain. And I didn't even know I was in pain.
Yeah.
Do you see? So here is someone who ever since, as an 8-year-old, she saw me, she knew there was something linked her to me, she empathized with my pain, and I didn't even realize I was in pain.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Well, so the thing is, in one sense, if that pain is linked to my own parents, who perhaps are not even able to acknowledge it or see it, and that's no fault of theirs, really. That's just the way, that's just the way people develop or don't develop.
Yes.
Then I am of all people blessed to have someone that before I even knew I had pain, saw I had pain.
Could see it. That's incredible. And
yet love me.
Yeah.
You see? And wanted to bring something to my pain. So, I suppose the heart of my story is exploring what it means to love and be loved in all its complexity, with all the heartache, with all the heartbreak of children not living with their dad, of the guilt of all that, the pain I've inflicted on their mums. They might turn around and say, well, and quite rightly so.
They might have a different perspective.
They'll have a completely different perspective. You're always, and fair play to them. I'm no saint, but all I'm trying to do is, if Jesus says, there's a guy came to Jesus and said, Master, Rabbi, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus turns around to him and says, what does Moses say? What is written in the commandments? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. He says, you are right. And the second is like the first. So we cannot claim that we love God until we can accept that the closest we get to God is here, because created in the image of God. So until we can accept ourselves, accept how we were born, what we were born into, with all the heartache and the pain, but see that actually, even though our own parents or our own upbringing or lack of parents or whatever it may be can describe us in one way, we can define ourselves as children of God. And what does that mean for me? That means children of love. Children of the most unconditional, gracious, accepting, forgiving love. So part of my exploration is to say, if I want to obey the greatest commandment, I can leave God to be God. God doesn't need my love. I mean, if God is the creator of the universe or the multiverse, God doesn't need my love. But the God who created me, and if I'm created in the image of God, that needs my love. So I've got to love myself if I'm going to love God. So it's about loving myself, which means self-awareness and finding out who I really am, and loving the hurt child and the angry child and the rejected child and the abused child, or whatever it may be. But then it's also working through all that darkness and selfishness to make sure that I love other people as I am loved. And if there's anything me which is not loving towards myself, and that means I don't love other people because I've been treated in a bad way, so therefore I find it easy to even if I claim to love them in a way which isn't loving, because my experience of love has not actually been true love, then I need to work that through.
Yes.
So I am nowhere near arriving. I'm just still trying to work it out.
Yeah.
And I'm in this amazing place called Cull Island. And I can tell you more of my story, which lets me know that I am in something which is, it's beautiful. Yeah, and because there's been so much hurt and so much pain, I mean, I almost like I feel accepted in Cull Island, because even though my pain may come from a different place in terms of people's political narratives or whatever it may be, I just made the choice that was available to me at that particular time when I went to the library.
Yeah.
I could have gone to the library in Cull Island and looked up another book, or I could have gone to a hall somewhere in Cull Island or to a house somewhere in Cull Island and made the same choice.
Yeah.
And joined another organisation or whatever it may be. But I'm sort of coming to realise that I'm in a very special place in Cull Island because of my own personal story, but because my experience of human suffering links me to the human suffering of the people of Cull Island.
Yeah.
Do you know? And that's not just, and that includes my own parishioners, who have endured terrible suffering. And they have. Yeah. That's my own people. And so, I'm called to love everybody. Love your neighbour as you love yourself. I'm called to love my own parishioners within Brackenwood, Hendry Valley, Clog. But I'm called to, love the people of Mount Cairn. Yeah. The people who live behind me. The people who live on the Ballinakelly Road. Anyone.
Yeah.
So, anyway. So
there's people that are at home thinking that this man is just saying that because he's on a podcast. A few years back, I lost my dad to suicide. And you were the first man on the scene of a man of cloth. You were there. It was down, do you know where the bank is? The old bank?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was in 2016.
Above the...
Remember when I said you at the start I met you very briefly before?
And you were on the pavement or something?
Yeah. And you came and you asked what was happening. I explained to you, and I explained that we were Catholics, and I didn't know how this all worked. And you says, "Well, if you need me, I'm here." Put your hand on my shoulder, and you said, "If you need me, I'm here." And you stood around for another hour or so. And that's how I know you're being very genuine, very honest in everything you say.
Wow. Well, God bless you. I'm really sorry. And,
that's one of the reasons that when I was initially starting this podcast, I thought I have to talk to this man. I just have to talk to him because there's something there,
Well, I mean, I thought you were going to say, you see, one of the first suicides that I attended was Mickey Quinn in Mount Cairn.
Yeah, remember that.
And then there was was it Gary and Treya? I'm trying to think.
Yeah. It's been a speed.
And then there was one just along, you know, and so, well, I mean,
it's crazy how it works, how interconnected everyone really is.
Well,
you know?
that we are, and we are all, you know, we are all interconnected, and we can just see our common humanity. Yeah. So
it's crazy how the world works. Like your first place you were ever based was Kyle Island, and now you're here's a reverend.
You couldn't make it up.
You really couldn't.
No, you couldn't.
It's fantastic how the world works, and I believe we are all here for a reason. You know, and our paths were meant to cross for some reason, and they have.
Yeah, and I think the thing, I think the thing is be proactive, and you've been proactive, and I think that's the thing is that my experience actually, even as I was cycling here today, okay, I knew that I'd be cycling past certain houses, and I had in mind one particular person who's been in hospital. You see, so I'm cycling along the thing. I don't know where I'm going, but it's somewhere up there, and it's gonna, you know, I haven't really got time to stop to speak to anyone. But I want to be out there in the sunshine and sort of be out there. And as I was cycling along, coming towards this house that I could see in the distance, where I knew that someone had been in hospital, I could see in the distance a car pull up into that house. And just as I was cycling past the house, I saw that the person who'd been in hospital had got out the car and was just about to walk round the corner of the house. Right? Mm-hmm. And you have that split-second moment where you think, well, I could cycle on past and then phone them back later and say, how's things going?
Yeah.
Or you can shout out.
Yeah.
And increasingly I'm seeing that if we're vigilant, if our eyes are open, if our ears are open, if our hearts are open, we will see, sense, feel amazing opportunities that are there all the time just to be taken.
Yeah.
But what we have to do is we have to take that step. So it's a bit like, you know, forgive me, but I suppose I'm wearing one of these, you know. It's and Jesus is the master of this. It's getting in the boat with Jesus and going to the other side.
Yeah.
It's saying, do you know what? The journey has not ended. The journey must continue. But it's a journey that I create and I make by taking that step, by inviting Andrew or Rev Andrew Rawding to do a podcast or shouting out to someone or not letting it go.
Yeah.
And not being held back by all that's put up to divide us, separate us,
exactly,
and make us think that even we have enemies.
Yeah.
And the truth is we don't.
We certainly do not.
There's no human being that is our enemy. The enemy is everything that divides us and separates us and makes us think that we have enemies.
Yeah, exactly. Now, very recently, you kind of went viral, didn't you? You did
something like that. Yeah,
there was a very, very handsome vicar with a placard. Do you want to explain to people what that was all about?
Yeah, well, I think you've mentioned suicide, and my first wife found her brother in the house.
That's terrible.
And I lived with that in my first marriage. You know, all the pain of that. God bless her and her family.
I don't think people understand the hurt that comes with that for someone to find a loved one in that situation. You know, it's one of those things I don't think you can ever get over. It's something you're constantly dealing with every day for the rest of your life. You know.
So that was, I suppose, my first encounter with suicide. And then I just knew that if I was going to be bobbing around in ships in the Gulf of Aden or wherever it may be, you know, I didn't want to be in this ship with so many hundred other people and to be faced with a suicide and not know. So as I said to you, I think before, I made sure I got some suicide awareness training or prevention training. Then actually when I came to Kyle Island, I was made aware of another type of training called Safe Talk training. And I did some Safe Talk training. And then through the Public Health Agency, I attended a Train the Trainers course to deliver Safe Talk. And I've delivered Safe Talk training actually in Kyle Island for the Mid-Ulster Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy and community groups, as well as in church contexts. Anyway. One of the vulnerable groups to suicide, as I researched this in order to highlight in the training who are the vulnerable groups, one of the vulnerable groups is people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, or something like that, you see. And I would have quoted in my training that there was a bit of research done by the Irish College of Surgeons, I think in 2012, saying that gay people were 8 times more likely than heterosexual people to be thinking about suicide or to complete suicide, you see. And there's a lot of research out there now saying that sort of thing. So I'd always been sort of advocating for LGBT people in terms of my suicide awareness training. I'd also become aware of young men in and around Cull Island completing suicide.
Yeah. It's been a bit of an epidemic as of late.
Yeah. Now, some of this may have been linked to being a former combatant. You know, you hear something like that. Very often people talk about people being the life and soul of the party and all this sort of a great guy and everything else. But, you know, I always just wondered, because I remember speaking to Professor Thomas Joyner, whose father completed suicide. He's a top suicidologist, I think, you know, in America. Just Google, you know, Professor Thomas Joyner. He's written books about it. Okay. I remember meeting him in Derry at a conference, a conference about suicide, and talking about young men, and he was saying, you know, in terms of LGBT or gay young men, there's a spike between 19 and 29.
Okay.
They either come out and they're not accepted, or they can't come out. They even get married or have a girlfriend or whatever. They can't come out, and then they just can't keep it going, and then they complete suicide. So, you know, I was aware of stuff in and around Cull Island, of, you know, the possibility of some of the young men in and around Cull Island that maybe was a reason for suicide. Other young men connected with churches, and churches that would be connected with a literal view of the Bible, where homosexuality would be condemned, where you'd be told from the pulpit, you know, homosexuality is a sin, and therefore a gay young man or a girl or bisexual, whatever. And I'd met people who were suicidal, been suicidal since the age of 8, and known since the age of 8 that they were gay, you see. And this was in the wider Cull Island area, you see. Yeah. So I had all this sort of within me, but no one within the Church of Ireland wants to hear about this. That's you know, I'd actually written letters to people, or, you know, very high up within the Church of Ireland. No one in the Church of Ireland wanted to talk about it. None of my fellow rectors wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to talk about it. Right?
I think it's the fear of offending. You know, especially older parishioners that have a certain view of homosexuality, that don't take the time to understand that people are people, and I think there's that social level.
Genuinely, there's people within the Church of Ireland and other, you know, denominations who genuinely believe that, you know, being gay is a sin. You know, so that's what that became, you know, and that, you know, this is all part of Adam eating the apple. Anyway, so I sort of had this and was aware of it, and it was just, I'd be preaching about this on a Sunday morning, linking in with the example and teaching of Jesus Christ. Then I've been made aware by a parent within our churches that their child had said, come out to them and said, I'm gay. I've been aware of the sort of the complexities of that within the family in terms of acceptance and non-acceptance and all the rest of it. So I now have thought, well, you know what? You're not just preaching this from your awareness of stuff in the, you know, this is now in your parishes, and you need to be preaching stuff which makes people supportive. And then another parent came to me and said, look, you know, my child is really struggling at school. I'm really struggling with what she's hearing from Christians in terms of their view on issues, and really struggling with the Church of Ireland's stance on homosexuality, you know, and on same-sex marriage and all the rest of it. So I said, look, let's have a meeting. You know, there have been another couple of parishioners who, you know, sort of, this was a big issue for them because of the impact on homophobia in their family, or affecting their family, you know, gay loved ones, this sort of thing. Right, let's get these young people together. Let's get a few young people together. Let's advertise this openly within the parishes and even wider than the parishes. You know, if you're struggling to believe what it says in the Bible, If you're struggling to maintain your Christian faith or whatever it may be, if you're struggling with your sexuality or sexual orientation, come along to this meeting and let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So we had a meeting in Brackerville. It was a very small group of young people there. And one of them said, we talk about a number of issues. And one of them said, well, you know, my friend's gay. We all think my friend's gay. Everyone at school thinks my friend's gay. I've been to my friend's home, and one parent said, "Oh, I hope my child is not gay." And my understanding is that my friend goes to a church which is not supportive or openly supportive, or may even say that being gay is a sin. Yeah. I said, right. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, my suicide alertness is going. I said, I wouldn't be surprised if that friend says, people would be better off without me.
Yeah.
This young person said, my friend has already said that. I said, okay. Right. First thing we need to do is we need to get you trained in safe talk suicide alertness.
Yeah.
Right. So we did a session. We got Kira from the Rainbow Project to come and be sort of like the safe person in the room. I did the training. We got some young people together. And I trained them in safe talk suicide alertness.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And then we thought, right, you know what? We need to do something else. So I made contact with an organization called Car a Friend.
Okay.
Wonderful organization. They're in the same building as the Rainbow Project in Belfast. Rainbow Project is to support adults. Car a Friend is to support youth. They're the longest established, LGBTQI plus supportive organisation. I think here in Northern Ireland, actually, Car a Friend, maybe not as well known as the Rainbow Project, but they do great work with youth, you see. So I made contact with them and said, look, I'm Church of Ireland Rector. I have this going on in my parishes. I have this going on with the young people in my parishes. I have this going on in the local schools or people connected to the local schools in and around Cookstown, Dungannon. We want to do something which is supportive of parents and young people. Mm-hmm. Will you come and do a session in Brackerville Church which basically educates us and raises awareness for any parents? If your child is gay, what do you say to them? What do you not say to them? Mm-hmm. All this sort of stuff, which is so important. Yeah. How can you support your child? How do you support your grandchild, you see? So we did this in Brackerville Church in Cull Island, I think December last year. And they gave this presentation. The Archbishop was there. It was great. There was a good number of people there. And people came from all sorts of areas in Northern Ireland to be there. There wasn't a lot from Cull Island. There wasn't a lot from my parishes necessarily. But the young people were there, and they introduced it, and they spoke up and said we said, like, we'll form a little group, and they called it Just Love, because they said, look, we just need to follow Jesus, which is love one another. So we called it Just Love. Let's stay with the main man. He says love one another, so we'll call it Just Love. So they spoke at this, and then after we'd had these presentations, we just had like an open forum, you see.
Yeah.
And one person, not from Cull Island, stood up and said, I grew up in a very Christian setting. I had a very strong Christian faith. I went to the leaders within my church and said, I've now realised that I'm gay. The leader in my church said, we don't talk about that. That's not something we talk about. That's wrong. You need to take it to Jesus, something like that. And then this person said, well, I went back to the leader in my church and said, I either accept myself as gay or I have to end my life. The pain of not being accepted, the pain of not being able to love and accept themselves, the pain of thinking or being told that, there's something wrong with me, I'm intrinsically sinful, or I embody sin, or I'm displeasing to God, or whatever it may be. The pain is so much. You're basically telling me that, I deserve the wrath and judgment of God.
Yeah.
I either accept myself as gay and go on a journey to accept myself as a Christian and my own personal relationship with God or Jesus as I know it, and come to terms with who I am, accept who I am, or I have to end my life. Now, fortunately, that person found the strength and, started to look into it and was able to accept themselves in their Christian faith. there was another person there who actually was from Cull Island and said, stood up and gave their story and said, oh yes, I went on the Pride March in Belfast and there were all these people screaming at us and even, I don't know, maybe, heckling us, and they were Christians. And it made me feel so bad about myself. And then there were other Christians sort of shouting stuff back, and I thought, well, that's wrong as well, you see. Anyway, then actually there's people from Cull Island who we did that event in Cull Island, then we did another one in Belfast. And I'm connected to people in Cull Island, my neighbours on Facebook.
Yeah.
And someone had seen a relative liking my post or something, and then someone from Cull Island made contact with me and knocked on the door. And a person who's gay, and I got to know their story and all the pain they'd been through and everything else. And I thought, you know what? The legacy of the church's approach to all this, the silencing, the using verses from the Bible, the denying people the God-given right and gift of love, the effectively giving young people the choice of either some holy celibacy that only very few people are called to, if they're called to at all, celibacy or extreme loneliness, i.e. have no contact with someone that you feel attracted to, that you want to love, who wants to love you. No, live a life of loneliness, maybe from the age of 8, or even I know, a gay person who knew they were gay from the age of 4. Live a life of loneliness for the next 90 years. The denying of gay people same-sex marriage, not just legally in terms of Northern Ireland, but within churches, the blessing of God's unconditional love and grace is wrong. And I'm now hearing this and the pain of vulnerable teenagers, people in their 20s, early 20s, people in their late 20s. We've got to do something about this.
Yeah.
The gloves are off. This is no longer Andrew Rawding Safe Talk Suicide Alertness Trainer taking stuff from research or with a few hidden stories. These people have been in my church. They're knocking on the rectory door. We need to do something about this, and we need to say sorry. We need to acknowledge their pain and say sorry for how we've mistreated them. We need to send a strong message that we're all God's children, created to be loved and love equally. So I got on my computer, and my father used to be a graphic designer, and somehow some of those skills came down or whatever. I'm not saying there's anything good about what I do, but I got on the computer and used Microsoft Word to the edge of its abilities and all the rest of it, and came up with a couple of messages. I put one of them past on a sort of forum which has got LGBT Christians on it, and said, what do you think? And the guy that stood up in our church and said about, I have to accept myself or I have to end my life, came back and, just reworded a few things. I then sent it to a man who puts things on Corryboard in and around the Cull Island area. Price that up for me. Can you produce that? I want to take it on Pride. He produced them. He charged me nothing.
Fantastic.
And so we then became aware of an organisation called Christians in Pride, which I think is an organisation which is in England and different areas, maybe even global, I don't know. And we joined them. And my wife and I, my son, our 2 toddler twins, my 2 stepdaughters, my wife Loveday's 2 daughters. More of my children would have come if they'd been in the country or whatever it may be. And we went and we went on Belfast Pride. And, I felt very humbled to be there because, I went in my clerical collar because I wanted, but the funny thing is, as we were walking from the Odyssey car park towards Belfast Pride, people could see someone in a clerical collar, and the looks I was getting, people were like, they were traumatized, literally.
Yeah.
And then we got to where we were all meeting, and someone had a rainbow flag. I said, "Give me that quickly," So I put this rainbow sash on, as if to say, "Look, I'm part of this.
Yeah.
I'm not here to judge or condemn you with this black shirt and clerical collar." And so great humility. I mean, what really right had I to be turning up as a cleric to something where these people had endured, persecution and all sorts of stuff, and I'm just turning up and being part of this. But what I realised, and the other, we had the young people, a couple of the young people, and the parents were there holding the Just Love banner from Brackerville and Donaghentry parishes, which was great.
Seen the pictures; it looked fantastic.
Yeah, so it was just amazing, and I think what was really special for me, I'm actually quite out. I come from London, and I suppose we're a bit louder and a bit more out there.
Yeah, I'm saying nothing.
Sorry, turn the volume down. No, so the thing is that I've got I'm someone that's sort of been out there in the public, and what was so amazing for me and was to carry this placard for people to read it and to cheer. I mean, Loveday said to me, people saw your sign and were visibly moved to tears.
Yeah.
And I saw that for myself.
Mm.
And so I thought, you know what, this isn't just about this sign. I need to make contact with people. So I was just going up to people and saying, peace be with you, God loves you, God bless you, peace be with you, and all that sort of thing. People asked me for selfies. And I tell you the other, there was this amazing moment, lots of amazing moments, but there was one particular moment where we'd got to City Hall, and then we turned left past City Hall, and there was all these people with their placards behind the crowd there doing whatever there is their protests. Anyway, so none of that really impacted on me, although I held my sign up really loud, really high, so anyone could see it. And then we went along, and it was raining, and we were waiting. Actually, we hit the back end of the parade because so many people involved. So we're in this sort of standstill, and on my left-hand side was a bus shelter. All these people shouting from the rain, this bus shelter. So I thought, I had my Rosie, my 2-year-old, on my shoulders at this point. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and say peace be with you to all the people in the bus shelter, So I went to the bus shelter, and I was just reaching out and saying, lovely to see you, peace be with you, God loves you, God bless you, and all the rest of it. And this figure came behind me and said, hello, Andrew. And I just saw this fleeting figure. I thought, oh, who's that? And I got to the end of the bus shelter, and then on the other side of the bus shelter, i.e. not in the shelter, was this hooded figure in the rain with the hood pulled down really tight, and this little face looking out at me, adult face, looking out at me, and this person said, you don't recognise me, do you? I think I do recognise you. I recognise you. I recognise you. I recognise you. I recognise you. Please, give me the name. Give me the name. Where do I recognise? And I recognise this person. And I'm almost certain, well, in fact, this person's parents go to one of Brackerville, Donaghentry and Ballyclock. And I would say this person grew up. I know this person grew up in Brackerville, Donaghentry, Ballyclock. I know this person would have been baptised in Brackerville, Donaghentry or Ballyclock. I'll not be more specific than that. Would have been confirmed, Yeah. And I saw this person, I knew this person's name, and I knew the connection with Brackerville, Donaghentry and Ballyclock. And I said, you know what? I've had a reasonable amount of opposition about it, being on this, right? Mm. But it's worth it just to see you. And this person said, well, by me, you are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just, that crazy Andrew Rawding who wants celebrity or whatever I'm being accused of, or, just making a fool of himself again. I've had all that, or dishonouring us or whatever it may be. No. Mm-hmm. I met a child. Might be a child in their 30s or 40s, but I met a child at the roadside looking for acceptance and belonging and love.
Yeah.
And it was worth it for that.
And those are the fundamentals of Christianity.
Well, to go back to the main man, he crossed the road. Mm-hmm. He tells that story about walking by on the other side.
Yeah.
And of course, what I've come up, I've had phone calls to the rectory. It's disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. All this sort of stuff. You need to get down on your knees.
And it's sad that in 2019 that's an issue.
Well, but this is it. You see, I have broken the holiness code.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus repeatedly broke the holiness code. Yeah. So the Pharisees, the gatekeepers, the Sadducees were all the time, that the church of the day, albeit the synagogue of the day, was all the time trying to controlling the money, controlling what people thought, controlling what people believed, controlling even contact that people had with each other.
Yeah.
The them and us, the people who's in, the who's out, and everything else. Women, of course, and children were excluded from all that. Lepers were excluded. Prostitutes were excluded. Tax collectors were excluded. Anyone with any sort of disease was excluded. Anyone who was mentally ill, the diagnosis of the day would have been demon-possessed, was excluded. You know, they were all excluded.
Yeah.
And repeatedly, Jesus reaches out, touches the woman, allows the woman to touch him, picks up the child, goes outside the city to meet the lepers, crosses the lake, crosses the border to the Syrophoenician or the Samaritan village, tells stories which is about the actual enemy, the Samaritan, you know?
Yeah.
And all the time he's saying, don't walk by on the other side.
Yeah.
Because when the rich lawyer or the clever guy asked him, turned round to catch Jesus out and said, well, who is my neighbor? That's when he told him the story. And then he said to the rich lawyer or whatever it was, and who in that story was the neighbor to the man who'd been beaten up? Now, the lawyer or the religious guy or the clever guy or whatever couldn't even bring himself to say Samaritan. What he said was, the one who showed compassion. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. So in some small way, I'm just trying to be part of that go and do likewise.
Yeah. Do you think there's a lack of maybe knowledge in some parts? You have you've done certain research on suicide and stuff like that, and that's what brought it to the forefront of why these people need acceptance, like the rest of us. Do you think if other vicars and other pastors and other priests had the same kind of research at hand and were able to delve into it the same way you have, it would maybe change their opinion?
I think there is a need for education.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a need for education. I mean, I grew up with homophobia. I grew up homophobic. I grew up in the 80s.
It was the norm.
Homophobia was the norm.
Yeah, I
grew up in the 80s with AIDS, the whole AIDS epidemic, 70s and 80s. I was a teenager in the 80s, Freddie Mercury, George Michael, Boy George, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, all that sort of stuff, which was out there, and people would have been very threatened by it because they just couldn't. It was just so
different.
So different, you see. And so I was brought up with all that stuff. So I think science is helping us.
Yeah, massively.
I think science, we can educate ourselves in terms of science. But of course, for some people who call themselves Christians, they haven't come to terms even with science in terms of creation or the universe or dinosaurs or whatever it may, may be. I think a big, really, really big part of the journey is self-awareness and being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And being able to accept yourself in all your complexities. And one of the big issues we have is internalized homophobia. And what that means is, and I've come across this in my own journey with people within the church, is that people are actually struggling with their own sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Have to keep themselves safe. And have to keep themselves secure. Okay? And that may mean that they join the church.
Yes.
Because then they have this sort of tight, safe framework which they can link into either the Bible, which they would describe as Holy Scriptures, or they can link into the doctrines of the church or what the Pope has said or whatever it may be. And that way they keep themselves safe from their own,
inner feelings.
They may not even be aware of them. They just may know that there's something there. And so what you have is you have people who can't accept themselves. People who maybe feel that they are a disgrace, that there's something wrong with them. And then they can internalize it, or they can externalize it. Yeah. And if they externalize it, then that means they take it out on other people. And what's going on is their own inability to accept that maybe they're gay, and maybe that they feel judged by God, and that they don't feel good enough for God, and they don't feel accepted by God. And so they find it very easy to talk about, we're all sinners. We're all sinners, and to club LGBTQ people or LGBTQI in with sin. No, there's nothing. Take intersex, where people have got different genitalia, or something. It's a physiological biological thing. Yeah. How can you turn round and say there's nothing to do with doing anything or even feeling anything? Yeah. This is just about trying to accept oneself and fit in and everything else. And how can you just dismiss these people as sinners? Yeah. Take the vulnerable people who I've come in contact with, who are very fearful about any intimacy, but know that they are gay. How can you say they're sinners? They've done nothing that you might define as sin. So you're basically, it's completely wrong. There's nothing sinful about being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex. What is sinful is anything which harms yourself or harms other people. Anything which denies yourself love and denies other people love. And I don't mean that I don't believe actually when Jesus was talking about sin, it was about condemnation and judgment. I think he was saying, I'm giving you an opportunity. When he talks about repentance, I'm giving you an opportunity to turn in another direction. It's not about on your knees, crawling, on your knees and flagellating yourselves and sackcloth of ashes. No, I'm simply telling you there is another way. Yeah. And it's a way of love. And it's a way of acceptance, and it's a way of kindness, going back to love yourself and love other people. And I think what the church has done is that it's used this repentance, this theology of sin to control and manipulate, make people feel bad about themselves, make people feel they're less than, that they owe something to God. And of course, then the church controls the access to God, and, Whereas actually, yes, we are all sinners, but not in a way which is about condemnation. But we all need to continue to learn to accept ourselves and love ourselves and be kind to ourselves and be kind to other people. And that's where I see the example in the teaching of Jesus, giving us a framework for that,
It's fantastic. Fantastic work. Now, if someone's at home and they're watching this and they're struggling with those issues, have you guys got any Facebook groups or anything that's set up for your Just Love?
Yeah, we have Just Love and Acceptance, but I would encourage people to make contact with Cara Friend,
yes,
and with the Rainbow Project. These are organisations that are run by LGBTQI+ people. Mm-hmm. These are people who understand it fully. These are people who can empathise more fully. They've had all the training, and there's some wonderful people out there, and they're very kind, compassionate people. So anyone can try and make contact with me, but I would make contact with the professionals.
Yeah.
Particularly if it's an LGBTQ, plus issue.
Yeah.
If it's something to do with suicide, and there are the Samaritans, there's Lifeline.
Yeah.
We have something in Kyle Island, Friends to Talk.
Yes, fantastic.
Which is great. And I think, it's all about human relationships.
Massively.
It's all about human relationships. And we have in Kyle Island people who genuinely care. Mm-hmm. People who've been through terrible pain, come through the other side. And so I think when it comes to suicide, yes, we can get help, and we must get help from professional people.
Massively.
We must do that. But it's about finding acceptance and belonging and purpose where you are. And that's within yourself and within your context. And if you're struggling to find that in your family, it's not your fault. It may not even be your family's fault. Then know that there are people out there in Cull Island who want you to know that you fit in. You may think that you could never fit in because you've done something or someone's told you there's something wrong with you. I'm telling you now, you fit in. And there are people in Cull Island who will love and accept you just as you are. And you can get through that. Whatever the pain is, you can get through it. And there's people in Cull Island who've been there. They're still going through pain. And together, you will find a way through. So I think it's that powerful combination of the professionals and friends and family and community who are loving, and it comes down to loving kindness and acceptance. And I see that I see that increasingly in Cull Island, which is wonderful.
Brilliant. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a tradition in the podcast.
Right.
We always finish with these 10 questions. I'm going to look them up because I always keep forgetting one.
Oh boy.
There are the 10 actor studio questions. I don't know if you've ever seen Inside the Actor Studio.
Is this on TV?
It was. I don't think it is.
Okay. The only TV I really watch is CBeebies.
I have a very similar thing, but it's all YouTube now. It's all
Teletubbies and things like that.
Yeah.
That's because the 2-year-olds control the TV in our house.
We have 2 big TVs, and that's the same thing. both TVs they have nursery rhymes 24/7.
Yeah.
So essentially, an actor will come into this school of actors,
okay,
like a famous actor, and they'll be interviewed, and the actors in the audience can ask questions.
Okay.
But at the end of it, the actors always ask these same 10 questions.
Mm.
And I'm going to ask them to you.
Okay.
And let's just see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 1 is, what is your favorite word?
Love.
Lovely. Number 2, what is your least favorite word?
Hate.
Number 3, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Oh, there's a whole number of things, but I think nature. I think the power of nature, and anything which is getting to the heart of the human emotion. The idea that the darkness is not the end, that it's out of suffering, it's out of pain that we find new life. So those sort of human stories that gets me, that gets me going. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, and the opposite of that, number 4, what turns you off?
What turns me off? I think anything which is too controlling turns me off. I think from my childhood there was a lot of manipulation, a lot of control, and then from the military. So I find myself sort of reacting against that. I go into like hedgehog mode, or try and take control myself, and it's a negative thing, and it's not good. It's something I need to continue to work on. Yeah.
Okay. Number 5. This could be an interesting one. What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
It's there. It's right there. I was gonna interject with, you don't have to say anything.
No. I think part of my emancipation. I never forget. I think it's 4 Weddings and a Funeral, wasn't it, or something like that, with Hugh Grant.
Yeah.
And we go, fuck. And when you cover my childhood, and then you've been in the military and you try to be some sort of holy Joe, no, you just got to get it out there.
Yeah.
I think so. I apologise to anyone in terms of their associations with what that might mean.
Yes.
But there's no better. Sometimes you just say, you know what, fuck it.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Number 6, what sound or noise do you love?
The first thing that came to mind was bird song. I think the dawn, the dawn chorus, and then the laughter and the happiness of my own. I mean, the laughter and the happiness of my own children.
Yeah,
I think that's powerful.
Brilliant. So number 7 then is the opposite of that. What sound or noise do you hate?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that sort of, you must repent, and if you don't repent, you're going to hell. You know, that type of thing. That, I mean, immediately I had a picture of a guy, you know, either in Belfast city centre or Coleraine or Cookstown, shouting at people.
Yeah.
And just stony-faced and surrounded by very stony-faced people. And I find that very difficult because it's not the good news.
No.
And I feel for the people doing it. I don't want to judge them or condemn them, but I just think there's no good news in this. Mm-hmm. There's no love in this. This is not making people feel loved. You think you've got a good news of love, but it's starting from condemnation. And until people, as far as you're concerned, until people accept that they, you know, should be judged by the wrath of God, but God loved them enough to rescue them through Jesus. No. You know, the starting point, it was, well, you were created out of love. Even if you didn't find it within your parents, you know, biological parents, you were created out of love.
Yeah.
The love of the universe, to be loved and to love. And that's it. And anything else is something that is robbing you of that love. You know, it's good news all the way. So I find that difficult.
Okay. Number 8, sorry. What profession, other than your own, would you like to attempt?
Do you know what? I do have this sort of extrovert side of me. I'd love to have been a singer.
Really?
Yeah.
It's not all it's cracked up to be.
No, I know. But I do... I think I went to see U2 when I was 17 or 18, the Joshua Tree.
Oh, wow.
Live Aid, you know, this sort of thing. And then I took my older children to see Coldplay in Croke Park.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I mean, I can stand up in front of a few people in Brackerville, Donaghadre, Ballyclog, and talk about love. And then you can fill Croke Park. And you can have the whole stadium singing about love and jumping about love, you know, whether it be a Coldplay song or whatever it may be. And so I get it from my mother's side of the family, who were sort of extroverts and entertainers. So that I have a little bit of that in me. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 9 would be the opposite again. Would be, what profession would you not like to do?
Anything to do with figures, maths. You know, I just, even though I'm doing an open university degree in psychology with counselling, and I know that this year there's going to be lots of statistics and stuff like that, I'm traumatised. I'm traumatised by my maths lessons, whether it be primary school or secondary school. So God bless all the accountants of this world.
Yeah.
But accountancy, no, sorry.
Okay, number 10, then we'll let you go. If heaven exists, which I believe you believe, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well, I think heaven is a place where we know that we're loved. I mean, I believe in heaven, but not a place which is above the clouds. I believe heaven is the place of love. And I believe more in the heaven here. You know, the kingdom of heaven is amongst you. So again, look, the church has portrayed heaven as being something which is about the afterlife. We have no idea. Mm-hmm. But when Jesus was around, he was saying the kingdom of heaven is here. It's right here, right now. The kingdom of heaven is among you. So anywhere where any human being knows that they're loved, they belong, and they have purpose is heaven. And we should be creating that, because far, 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 far too many people are already in hell. And it's not a hell of their own making. So we need to leave the afterlife to the unknown, to the mystery of the divine. And we need to be focusing on heaven here on earth, like Jesus Christ said.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
It has been a pleasure. And guys, thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you again next time. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Educating Aiden. But the conversation doesn't stop here. If you have any questions or just want to find out about upcoming episodes, then follow Educating Aiden on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Like and subscribe on YouTube, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for listening.